Was World of Warcraft going to have more than two factions, the Alliance and Horde? Well, yes actually, but only in like the really early development stages. You see, in other MMOs at the time, they did have factions as well, but they weren't as stringent as the two-faction system in WoW, and they worked more like reputations, where you could willingly choose them and then change them later on at the cost of losing everything. So there was many different factions you could join instead of being stuck to a faction as soon as you created a character. In this screenshot from the WoW diary, you can see a whole bunch of things written up on the whiteboard, which is basically just brainstorming for early WoW ideas, including what some of the classes people would be allowed to play, two of which didn't actually make it into the game, and a whole section called Factions, with a long list of potential factions listed under what their possible enemies could be. As at the top row, you have the Scarlet Crusade versus the Unseen Crown, and the Argent Dawn versus the Shadow Council, and further down you have something called the Dragonflights versus the Dragon Slavers, which is definitely not a faction that made it into the game. And there's a bunch of other factions that I can't actually read from the image. So it looks like they had planned on having a whole bunch of the different factions fighting each other. In the game files for Vanilla WoW, there's a couple of unused faction reputations, such as the Silvermoon Revenant, the Wildhammer Clan, the Reventusk Trolls, a faction called Test Faction, not a real faction, which all existed in the game files but were never actually made available to players. Now, it's not very likely these were meant as factions that players could join in place of the Horde or Alliance, and were more likely going to be used as reputations, which all got deleted from the game files when Burning Crusade came out. They even removed a couple of reputations that were in Vanilla WoW later on in WoW's lifetime. And there was also a lot of debate internally about whether or not the Horde would be an evil faction or not. And after a lot of debate, they went with the idea to make neither faction evil, even if the Forsaken occasionally did evil-ish things. And I know it might seem like they had always planned for a two-faction system, since we have Warcraft 3, which came out before WoW, and kind of had pieces of lore suggesting Horde and Alliance stuff, but taking a quote from the WoW diary book, one of the major design considerations for character design was the silhouette, because players could then identify enemies and allies quickly by their overall shape and size. In games, the player's eye is usually overloaded with text, interface elements, spell effects, and targets, so it was crucial that players could quickly identify friendly or enemy races. This was especially important after it was decided to create a split between the player populations into two opposing factions, a concept pioneered by Dark Age of Camelot. As you can see by this little excerpt, the two-faction system was not there from the start, and in fact was inspired by Dark Age of Camelot. In the MMO Dark Age of Camelot, which came out about 4 years before WoW, it was an MMO marketed as a PvP-focused game, which would have 3 separate factions that could constantly fight each other for resources and objectives in the open world, and if one faction ever got stronger than the others, then the 2 other factions could team up to take them down, which was supposed to be the game's balancing act. And this 3-faction system was Dark Age of Camelot's selling point, to kind of make it stand out from the other more PvE-focused MMOs at the time. And since the WoW team liked this system, and kind of had lore in place to incorporate this into their own game, the 2-faction system we have today was born, and it kind of accomplishes the same goals as Dark Age of Camelot had, of allowing players to have an infinite amount of content in the form of world PvP, where you can always have an enemy faction to fight. Although the faction imbalances are a lot more noticeable when there's only 2 of them, as a lot of classic realms will show you, as some of them have a balance of about 99-1. Something a 3-faction system tried to circumvent. And some people want Blizzard to just remove the faction system altogether, but that's a topic for a different video. So WoW originally was going to have more than 2 factions. Then they liked the more restrictive faction system in a different MMO, and decided they had the lore available to adapt a 2-faction system themselves. So we could have gotten a game where everyone was basically on the same side, and they would just pick one of the many factions out in the world to join for certain benefits. Kind of like what the Covenant system is trying to be in Shadowlands. And eventually they decided that was a bad idea, and just turned all those factions into reputations you can grind out for kind of the same rewards. Only there was no need to worry about competing factions to an extent. There are some factions that you grind out which will lower the reputations of others, but they're not super important ones anyway.